Hello and welcome back to the Ask podcast. I suppose technically it's kind of episode 7. We did sneak a couple of bonus episodes in for you over the last couple of weeks while the Year 12s were diligently doing their UCAS exams. But of course we hope you are back to attain some secret knowledge with us, with our fantastic guest that I will get on to very soon. To remind you, I'm Mrs Jenny Summers, Deputy Head of English and Drama at John Hampden Grammar School, and this is Mr Mark Till.
And I am Mark Till, and I'm the Head of English at John Hampden Grammar School. And we're back. We're in the studio. Yes. We have a teacher who has a fascinated looking forward to this one. This is going to be a good one. I would say that because I'm biased, but there we are. And a fantastic panel. This is a marvellous panel. So here we are, proper podcast. Pleased to be here. Let's do it.
Absolutely. And the experts editing.
And a clue's coming up as well. There's going to be a new, because there was a winner. If you didn't listen to the bonus podcast, there is a winner. Someone got the sequence of clues. It was Dylan in Year 11. And he's won the super special prize, which was a very large, lovely thing to spend in Oxford. And so there's going to be a new clue. So we begin again, and a new, even better prize next time. Okay. So listen up later for the clue. Okie
dokie, sounds brilliant. And we've got one returning guest today. We've got Dan.
Yes, I'm Dan. I do English, history and politics for my A-levels, and I'm also a frequent debater.
Fantastic. Well, we've got all of my favourite English guys here today, which I'm very excited about. Next to introduce is Shane.
I'm Shane. I do English, geography, chemistry, and I do dabble in Shakespeare. My EPQ is on Shakespeare, so in theory I should have something to add.
Sounds good. And Finn?
Hello, I'm Finn. I take music, English and religious studies, and I also take part in the debating club and enjoy arguing with Dan.
Don't we all? Don't we all?
Seems targeted.
Let's not start that fight now. We can have that afterwards, guys. And then, most importantly, our guest of honour, our prestigious guest today from our own English department. It is Mr Richard Langridge. We are very excited to have him with us today. He's going to be talking about one of his favourite topics, Shakespeare's lost years, particularly the theory that perhaps during his lost years he might have snuck off to Italy. But we'll let him talk about that more in a little bit. But it's worth saying he is not just a fantastic teacher. He has an incredible past that involves winning BAFTAs, in working at the BBC, heading up, some a TV station type thing in Malaysia. So I'm sure he'll find some ways to sneak some cheeky anecdotes in during this great discussion about Shakespeare today. So, first of all, as always, sir, why this particular topic? Why does it stand out to you in particular?
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for letting me speak on the podcast. It's a great honour, so thank you. Well, I was fascinated when I started teaching Shakespeare because it occurred to me that there were two periods in his life which we know nothing about. And I'd done Shakespeare at university and I'd done the plays, but I'd not realised that really we know very little about him before he was 27. We know he was born in Stratford. We know that he was the son of a glover and a sheep merchant. We know that he got married to somebody called Anne Hathaway when he was 18, and that's it. And the next thing we know, age 27, he's in London writing plays about kings and queens and seems to have an incredible knowledge of everything from the law, medicine, sheep shearing, even being on a boat. And you think, where the hell has this man come from? And that is such a question that it's actually sparked lots of people to say, well, hang on, how could this boy from Stratford-on-Avon, who didn't even go to university, end up writing about kings and queens and scholars and use sources like Ovid and Horace and Terence and Lilly and write wonderful sonnets? This just doesn't work. And so a lot of people have come up with this other theory that maybe Shakespeare didn't write the plays and it was somebody else.
We won't get into that because, none of us sensible people here believe that silly theory.
Right.
But do you want to outline a little bit what your kind of thesis is here? So what your theory is about what you think Shakespeare did where he was in those lost years?
There were two things that came together for me. One was these missing periods. There's a period between 1578 and 82, which was so-called first period, and then a bit longer period of about 7 years between 1585 and 1592, where there's no record, nothing at all. So that was one thing. There was this missing part of the record. And then the second thing was actually drawn from my own experience. I, after university, wasn't quite sure what to do. And I saw that there was a company called the Central Bureau for Education Exchanges advertising for assistant teachers in Italy. And I don't know why, but I just fancied the idea of going to Italy. So I filled out this form, except there was a bit at the bottom that said, you must be fluent in Italian. So I rather pathetically ticked it, and then to my horror got offered a job in Naples. And I was offered a job, and it came through, and it was to teach at the Technical Commercial Institute in Naples. So I then spent 4 weeks desperately trying to speak Italian, which failing miserably, of course. I had a record in those days and used to listen to this LP record of Italian, and the only thing I managed to learn was Mia chiama Riccardo, and that was about it. And then the horror of horrors, when I arrived in Italy and had to confess I didn't speak Italian, I wasn't teaching at a technical institute, I was teaching at a girls' school. And luckily they took pity on me and I stayed in Italy. But it was in a way the most formative year of my life, because I came from quite a sheltered upbringing in Suffolk, and suddenly to be thrown into Naples, which is like the Liverpool of Italy, in the days before the internet and the days before much was sort of known. I mean, we didn't even have cappuccinos over here when I was in Italy. So it was a complete explosion of experience. And so those things came together, and I thought, is this what happened to Shakespeare? Did he, in that missing period, go to Italy, and somehow, for over 7 years, it blew his mind? Maybe he fell in love, and was this which is the source of, in a way, his experience. So that was where it came from.
Sir, do you want to take the floor, or do you want to pass it?
Hannah, well, I suppose we've been discussing science recently, so if we were to take a scientific approach, what's your strongest evidence for the Italy theory? Or is it an imaginative, lyrical theory that is poetic and you'd love it to be true? Are there any concrete indications that this might have some substance?
I have to say straight away, there's no definite proof. There's no curling manuscript in some Italian library that says "E was ear" or anything like that. Except that if you make that imaginative leap and you say, okay, so let's suppose he could have gone to Italy. First of all, why would he go to Italy? Well, his father was a wool merchant. His father was a glove maker. And one of the crucial things you need to make gloves is this very special dye called alum, and it was only available from Venice. He also seems to know a lot about Antwerp, and Antwerp was the centre of the wool industry. So, as a hypothesis, you could say, okay, for his father's business, perhaps he went to Italy, purchased the dye, the alum, and then maybe ended up staying. The crucial thing, though, for proof is, and I'm happy to go into detail in a minute, is when you look at two things, that 13 of his 37 plays are set in Italy, and another 6 are very influenced by it. The second thing I would cite is the way that so much of his original source material was Italian, not just Ovid that he could have studied at Stratford Grammar, but other writers, and often editions that were only relevant in Italy. So there's an edition of Ariosto, which is only available in Latin and Italian up to about 1590. So where did he get that from if it wasn't from possibly a source in Italy? And then the third thing, which I'm happy to go into more detail, is that in a lot of his plays, they exhibit quite detailed knowledge that I feel only comes from someone who, at the very least, must have an incredible familiarity with Italy. Well, he was married to Anne Hathaway. He used to go back to Stratford relatively often, but Stratford didn't have a public library. There wasn't an internet. Where do you get sort of information about the street names of Venice. He knew about street names of Venice, for example. So I think in his plays, if you start to look at his plays from that perspective, there seems to be, I feel, quite a lot of circumstantial evidence.
Well, there are other theories, aren't there? There's theories that he had upset a local hunting deer in their reserve, and that's what forced him into hiding. So, I suppose what my question would be, what would make you prejudice you towards this theory about him going to Italy over, say, another theory, of which there are so many?
Yeah. As I mentioned, there's two periods where we don't know the records very well. There is one tiny piece of evidence which, for the first period, which was a period of about 4 years, where he could possibly have been a young teacher, because there is a reference in the family records of the Hesketh family up in the north of England, in a will from the owner of the estate. There's a reference to, and do take care of young Shakespeare. And so there is this suggestion that possibly his father, who had contacts, wanted to bundle Shakespeare out of some of the intensity of Stratford at the time, and he went and stayed with a Catholic family. The Stanleys and the Heskeths were Catholic families at a time when Catholic families were under a lot of pressure. There is some suggestion that Shakespeare's father was Catholic. So I think possibly the first period, you can see that there is one or two bits of evidence that, if put together, might mean that he was in the north of England, possibly as rather like I did, as an assistant teacher to a rich family. The second period, the 7-year period, there's very little record. He came back to Stratford during the summer of 1582, seems to have met Anne Hathaway. It was summer, it was hot, he was an 18-year-old man, she was a 27-year-old woman. These things happen. And so things did happen, and then for 3 years he's stuck. If you imagine, he's living in his parents' home, he's got brothers and sisters who are there. It must have been a smelly old place if his father was a wool merchant and a glove maker. He's got twins and he's got an older daughter. So he's got 3 children, because he had Hamnet and Judith, who were twins, and he had an older daughter called Susanna. And there is this 25-year-old man married to a woman that he possibly didn't love, climbing the walls, and he wants to get out. So that's just thoughts, really.
I have to say, during this conversation, I can only apologise, but I've become quite enchanted by the idea of Shakespeare going to Italy and finding this forbidden love that he then writes about later in Romeo and Juliet. You know, I was just wondering if you knew of any other instances where maybe his experiences in Italy have transferred into those plays. I know you mentioned it briefly, but could you expand on any of those?
Well, yes, thank you. I mean, if you take, for example, Verona, where Romeo and Juliet set, there is this, you could have this wonderful, as you say, literary sort of imagination that he fell in love with this beautiful girl in Verona, and the rest is history. But even in Romeo and Juliet, there are specific references, of which perhaps one of the most interesting I found was Benvolio says to Lady Montague, when she's asking where Romeo is, and he says that Romeo is very lovesick, and he was last seen in the grove of sycamore trees by St. Peter's Church. Now, if you go to Verona today, there is St. Peter's Church, and beside St. Peter's Church there is a grove of sycamore trees. So you think, well, hang on a moment, how come he knew that there was a grove of sycamore trees by St. Peter's Church? The whole legend, of course, of Romeo and Juliet is an historical legend. It was a story. There was a family called the Capula family that could have been the model for the Capulets. There was the Montecchi family, who could have been the Montagues. And there's references in Romeo and Juliet. For example, the prince says at the end of the fight, he says, "You Capulet and you Montague will come with me and we will discuss this fight. We will go to Freetown." Now, Freetown, strange name, but was actually the local name to the local castle of Salieri. And that is outside Verona, still exists, but it used to be called Freetown. There's also a reference to St Gregory's Well in Two Gentlemen of Verona. And St Gregory's Well, everyone thought it was made up. Then they excavated in the main square and they found a small chapel that was called St Gregory's. And in 2013 they uncovered the flooring and found a well. So there's little bits of information, and it may individually amount to nothing, but if you put it together, it's like the filings in a magnet. It seems to be pointing in one direction.
Can I be devil's advocate? So
Do.
if this was a courtroom,
Yeah.
and you were putting forward your theory, there has to be another side to it.
Absolutely.
And I hate to pour
Do.
water over this, because I would absolutely love this to be true, and I really hope it is. And I think you speak about it so poetically. Shakespeare, as we know, didn't come up with the plots of most of the plays. As you indicated, he reads a great many writers, classical writers, but particularly, as you say, Italian writers. Boccaccio, for example, he gets a lot of plots and stories from there. Might it be that he was using source material of Italian writers? And as he did, for example, with Holinshed, where he writes the English history plays, he often verbatim includes passages from those texts. Might he have done that with certain Italian source materials to account for the local detail?
It is possible, but then if you begin to think of the reality of that, so the reality is we're talking 1590s, 1600s. The reason we very luckily have got Shakespeare's plays is because his friends at the end of his life gathered together the individual play scripts and put them together in a folio. But they were written, and books were still largely written. Printing was happening, but it was expensive. So there wasn't the sort of wealth of material that we have. And even today, I would be hard put to find the source materials that Shakespeare had in an English setting. So when you think back to 1600, okay, so where are these Italian books? Where? Yes, okay, he might have had his own copy of Ovid. He may have had a copy of Lilly, but the amount of reference that he puts in, you begin to think, well, he must have either been incredibly lucky to have a friend who might have been possibly a family from Italy, who might have had books on their shelves, and he might have been able to access their own private library. But at a time when 12 books was seen as a luxury, let alone 150, 200. So I think to find the quality and the frequency of access that he must have had to write those plays is I find a little difficult in the South Bank of London. There is some suggestion that he might have had an affair with an Italian woman at the court. That possibly the Dark Lady refers to an Italian or Mediterranean woman who was attached to the musicians of the court.
Yeah,
and
this is in the sonnets, if people don't know. So a number of his sonnets
that's right.
seem
The
to be
Dark
written
Lady.
towards this figure who's known as the Dark Lady.
Yes, that's right. And some people say that it was possibly this Italian singer. Some people say that it might even have been the head of a brothel in Southwark, who actually seems to have been a woman from Gambia. Really unusually. So we're not sure, but I just feel that the amount of local detail that he tends to get when you look at Julius Caesar, for example, and the way that he can obviously have referred to Tacitus and some other classical writers and things like that, but he talks even about the weather in Rome. He describes in Julius Caesar the type of storms that they get in the summer in Rome, which are very distinctive, something to do with the 7 hills of Rome. The rain comes down in absolutely horizontal but blue sheets, something to do with the light. And he refers to the blue sheets of rain
And
in Rome.
that's not in Plutarch.
And-
he's not getting that from.
As far as I know, it could be. Truthfully, I'm not sure, but it seems to be that there is a lot there, which makes sense if you attach Italy to it.
interesting.
So sorry to try and add to
No,
this
not
cynical train of thought introduced by Mr. Till, but surely for as much evidence there is put forward in his play is that he does have a developed understanding of Italy and the kind of places there. There are also some inaccuracies, such as in The Tempest, when he refers to Milan's port, which has a factual inaccuracy in it. Not to mention also the fact that it would have been easier possibly for him to come across all this kind of literature, all of these ideas by being part of a theatre group, which possibly, because there were many touring around Stratford-upon-Avon in that time, could have moved into London, a very diverse place where lots of like-minded people like Shakespeare could have introduced him to this, as opposed to simply visiting Italy. You can get lots of inspiration, lots of love for the sites, but possibly not the developed language he uses, which we see throughout. So, what do you think would be a better argument? This picture I painted, or the more idyllic view?
I think. Well, of course we don't know, and I'm not going to say that you're wrong at all. And it's true to say that he borrowed, as Mr. Tillett said, from many sources. You know, so as we know, for example, Taming of the Shrew. There was an earlier play called A Taming of the Shrew, which people think might have been Shakespeare, might not have been Shakespeare. So there wasn't a lot of collaboration going on in the group. But I just come back to certain incidences of texts which seem to me to be quite remarkable if you haven't actually experienced it. So, for example, if you take The Tempest and you take his description of the storm in Tempest, he has lines like, "Yah, yah, take in the topsail, tend to the master's whistle." Now, I would argue that unless you've been on a ship in a storm, how do you understand that? Now, I know that that's not particularly a case for being in Italy, but he did travel, so, and that seems to indicate somebody who has a familiarity with navigation and the sea. And also, we are finding, as we get more and more archaeological evidence, that there are things in Shakespeare which begin to make sense. So, in Taming of the Shrew, there is this instance where they refer to coming to Padua from Pisa by boat. Now, there is no way that you can come from Pisa to Padua by boat now. But in Shakespeare's time, there was a canal which linked the Po River and the Brenta River, and it ran from Pisa to Padua. Again, how do you know that when you're based in Stratford? So there's a number of things. You could be right. I don't pretend this is right. I'm simply saying that for me, a lot makes sense, which doesn't make sense if you say that he could have gone to Italy.
To put forward another interesting theory, I was reading about one which painted Shakespeare to be of Italian descent, and perhaps immigrated to the UK, and this was first put forward in the 1920s due to a common Italian surname, or not common, but definitely used, being Calalanza, which roughly translate to Shakespeare. Now, multiple writers have claimed that Shakespeare could possibly be Italian, but would you put this down to possibly an Italian nationalist movement at the time, celebrating the nationality and trying to prove themselves forward, or do you think that this has some kind of merit to it?
There is this family in Sicily, in Messina, which of course where Much Ado About Nothing is set, who claim that actually their descendant was William Shakespeare, that he actually was born in Messina and he travelled to England. I feel, I'm not going to say you can disprove it, but I feel that if you're going to believe that, I'd rather you believe the one about he just popped on a boat and went to Italy. But I think it does explain, though, one of the controversies about Shakespeare is about, as I say, this going back to our earlier discussion about how could this grammar school boy in a provincial town at a time when books were an incredible rarity, only owned by the country houses of England, have in 7 years gone from that to writing Henry IV Part 1, for example. So there is this sort of question mark, and it's led a lot of scholars to say, well, obviously he couldn't possibly have written the plays or the sonnets. The sonnets were written by a woman. This is the new theory now, written by a woman, and that other people like the Earl of Oxford wrote the plays and things like that. So, but I don't think. Do you believe that?
No. There's a brilliant chapter in one of Jonathan Bates' books on Shakespeare. Another like Mr Langridge, another great Shakespearean scholar, and Jonathan Bates writes about a lot of the details in the play, which are the details of the kind of flowers and trees and agriculture that's very peculiar to Stratford, as almost a counterexample. Is that actually a lot of people wouldn't have known some of the things that Shakespeare would have known, given his upbringing in Stratford and being what he was often dismissed as a sort of country bumpkin type. But Jonathan Bates' argument is that he's able to write the plays because of the education he gets at the grammar school and translating the text and so on. But I agree with you. I think there's clearly something that happens when you're a young man to becoming 27 that means that you have that, not just the ability to translate from the Latin into powerful English, but you have the kind of humanity, the bigness of soul doesn't come from nowhere. That's interesting. And why wouldn't he go to Italy as well? You know, it's someone who he loved the idea of ancient Rome and all of the ancient Roman texts and culture. It was the land of the Renaissance. It was the place where the exciting art was happening. You had Commedia dell'arte, which he was clearly inspired by. So I guess if he was going to go anywhere on a ship, he probably would go there, wouldn't he?
Of course, it would make sense for the time, because Italy was, at the time, a largely sort of merchant collection of states. And, you know, as such, if he was, you know, working in the wool trade, say, it would make sort of a fair amount of sense that he would go to Italy. And with that being the case, you know, he would be able to see Venice and Rome and Naples and a whole range of places and taken a whole lot of the world. And it would make sense why he'd be able to sort of paint a holistic picture of these places, you know, however many years later, over however many plays.
I wish I was in Italy now. That's the only problem with this conversation. I'm longing for the beauty and the sunshine of Italy. Anyway, I don't want to bring down the excellent, happy feeling of this podcast. I was just wondering, I don't know if you've read yet Hamnet, the Maggie O'Farrell book, but I mean... I've
seen it. It's a recent book, isn't it?
Yeah.
About his dead son.
Yeah, and the reason I just wanted to talk about that is I just wondered, again, it's a different sort of angle, because it's theorising about their life in Stratford, and actually a lot of it is much more about Anne Hathaway and their life. But why is it we seem to be so fascinated by this idea of having to fill in these gaps? Why is it that we feel this need to fill in these gaps and find, you know, ways to explain the inexplicable? Do you think? Do you have any thoughts and theories on
that? Only that I think it's a very human. Perhaps it's a weakness, but it's that when we are confronted by something extraordinary, we seek for an explanation, whether that's in the music of Beethoven. I mean, I always find it astonishing that Beethoven wrote music when he was deaf, that when he completed the Ninth Symphony, he actually had to be... they actually had to hold him up and turn him around to see the applause, because he couldn't hear the applause. Wow. And the man had created the Ninth Symphony. So I think we are always looking for explanations for this peculiar genius of some people. And when you consider Shakespeare's achievement, he died, I think he was 58, but he'd written, I think, because one or two plays have been lost, if ever you're in a junk shop and you find an old scrappy piece of manuscript, it could be worth millions. There's a play. Yes, exactly. But he wrote 39 plays. He wrote countless sonnets. He wrote 3 or 4 very large narrative poems, or epic poems. But he wrote it with a feather, in the dark, with a candle, on blotchy parchment paper. How the hell did he do that? Let alone going to Italy, how did he do it without a typewriter? That's the biggest question, I think. So I think you're right. I think it's this searching for answers when one's confronted by something extraordinary.
Absolutely.
I think if we're getting into slightly deeper discussion, do you think that maybe that sort of lived experience of being somewhere and that translating into your writing, do you think that's now lost with the rise of technology, information being so easily accessible? Obviously, we're saying, had he had Google Maps in his day, he could have gone to Verona, found these street names. Is that sort of sense of adventure lost? Would Shakespeare, had he been born today, still have gone to Italy? Say he has.
It's a good question. I personally feel that there is a danger we've lost wonder. That underused word wonder, because I can only base it on my own experience. And as I say, we're talking 1977 when I went to Italy. There wasn't Costa, there wasn't cappuccino. Italy. The most I knew about Italy was when my mum gave me spaghetti hoops in a tin. That was Italian food, and suddenly, I was dropped in this astonishing world where people were quite prepared to express their feelings, where taxi drivers would sing opera on the way around Naples, where on my first evening I went for a walk and suddenly came across the most astonishing panorama of a volcano in the distance and a bay and an island in the middle called Capri, and it was like something unimaginable to a boy coming from Suffolk. Now, if I'd gone on to Google and I'd researched Italy and I'd as you say, gone on to Google Maps, and all that sense of wonder would have gone, because it was completely new to me. So I do feel that one of the great advantages is that we do have, Google Maps, but one of the disadvantages is, in a way, it's stripped us of wonder.
Maybe is that what makes Shakespeare so important to us? He's writing in a period where he has none of this information accessible, and yet he is still creating these amazing stories, these amazing characters, just based off of how he has lived. And I think maybe that is what makes him so important to us. We are losing the ability to have an imagination, I think, to put it in the most nihilistic way possible. And that is what makes Shakespeare's story so powerful. He still had this boyhood wonder when if he went to Italy. He went to Italy to explore, not to research his next story. The stories just sprouted from his imagination, his adventure, rather than maybe Google.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and I think Shakespeare is I'm very glad he exists in the school curriculum. I'm not sure that we teach him as properly as we should, but there again, I'm not sure how to teach Shakespeare, except to say that I feel in a way you need to understand the background to his life, and that gives you a great access to Shakespeare. You need to understand things like Protestant, Reformation, Renaissance, theology even, to really understand Shakespeare. And while you can appreciate it a bit, for many students now, it's like a foreign language. And the more you do it, the better it gets. The more you can really understand Shakespeare, the more plays you read, the more times you read a play, the better it is. So that by the time you get to sixth form, hopefully, Shakespeare isn't something to be frightened of. But I think as teachers, we've all seen the look of horror on students' face when they first encounter, that page of blank verse down the centre of the page, and they went, "It's a foreign language. I have no idea what this man's talking about." And that is something which I think as teachers we have a responsibility to try to work hard to get through to younger people.
And of course, it's about performance as well, which is obviously something we're sadly lacking at the moment. But hopefully, it's starting to come back. But that is one of the things I think that lockdown's had the heaviest toll on that idea of seeing Shakespeare come to life. I think that the Globe is doing a production of The Tempest this summer and a production of Romeo and Juliet, actually. So I'd encourage everybody to get out there, make sure they're going back, getting those tickets and keeping those theatres alive and keeping Shakespeare alive as well as they can.
Yeah.
Do we have any final questions to ask, sir? I think we've gone quite comprehensive.
Well, I was just thinking back to this idea of wonder, and it sort of reminds me if I'm of the Ernest Shackleton episode that we did.
Me too.
And this idea that it's sort of disappearing, and I think perhaps I'm refuting Shane's point, but I think the idea that we're losing wonder is sort of, I think it's overstated, I think, because the idea that everyone will take this wonder, everyone will seize the opportunities available to them, has never been true. You know, we remember Shakespeare and Ernest Shackleton, you know, all of these great people, because they were the lucky few who were able to get these opportunities and experience these wonderful things. And so, you know, while perhaps for individuals wonder won't be fully achievable, for some, and perhaps for the most prominent people who will become, you know, able to share experiences with others, they will still be around and we will still be able to experience them, which I think gives me a little bit of hope.
Well said.
I'm glad we've got some hope.
This links to our Passion for Places now, Mrs. Tremelling podcast. We're creating a hyperlinked series of episodes here.
Yeah, and you've received an email from me recently with links to all of the podcasts so far, so I do encourage you to make sure you listen to them. Oh, we've wrapped this up. I think this is the perfect time for a clue. Sir.
Oh, a clue, yeah. So new clue sequence, and it might not work the same as the other clue sequence, which was a kind of cryptic crossword style, well, acrostic style. This might be something different, but the word for today is Nadine, which is to say Nadine.
Oh gosh, we're going different this. I'm excited. Just to say, I failed miserably to get the clue last time, but I'm going to try very diligent. I know I can't win, sir, but it will make me feel a lot better about myself if I can solve your linked clues this
Bragging
time.
rights.
Absolutely, I don't mind having some bragging rights. So it's time for some thank yous. Thank you to loads of these lovely people. Let's start with our panelists. Fantastic. Finn, Shane and Dan, who have done a brilliant job of representing English A-level and the our collective knowledge. And I have to say it was good to see there was a bit of banter back and forth, even a bit of argument between them, because that is what it is like in my classroom frequently, if you ever have the fortune to come in and see. Of course, thank you to Mr Till for being my brilliant co-host. And very, very importantly, thank you to my lovely, lovely guest, Mr Langridge, who's really engaged my sense of wonder. I have to say, as I say, I want to go to Italy. I want to get delving back into Shakespeare. I want to look for those clues. I want to get engaged in the romance of the whole thing, because I think you've done a brilliant job of bringing all that to life. And of course, I must not forget to thank our lovely production team, including Tom, Aman, Barnaby and co. They always do a fantastic job, and you'll be thankful to know it's them handling the editing, so this actually will be edited properly, unlike possible previous couple of episodes. And also, of course, please do subscribe wherever you can. Listen to the podcast, share it with people, follow us on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube, email us. we're getting a lovely steady stream of emails from students asking about future possible people to come on and to go on panels and subjects and so on. So, keep doing that. They're the main things. I think, have I covered everything, Sarah?
I think that's it. Let's go and have a cappuccino, shall we?
Woohoo! Yes, let's please. Oh, period 5 free. Just time to get a cappuccino and do lots of year 10 marking. Yay! And on that note, I really hope you've attained loads of secret knowledge with us today. We've had an excellent time, and we hope to hear from you soon. And thank you very much and take care.
Thank you.